designed and set in motion to be the president starting next year into that place. We ask you to also be with us as we come to this most difficult chapter in the Bible, that with all the things going on in it, that you remind us once again, as many people have said throughout these turbulent times, that you are still in control of these things, and it is your will that ultimately is being done. We ask you to guide our thoughts and our minds as we go through this chapter to see that also as it was in ancient Israel. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, brother. I think, this the story in the second half of 2 Samuel really illustrates what you were just saying. I mean, like, we're going to see, Absalom is going to seize power for a period of time. We're going to have a whole lot of things that are pretty ugly going on with David and with his son Solomon. But by no means is there ever kind of this like era of, hey, look, we have our leader who has no faults and he's just great. No, that never seems to happen, right?
Right.
Could you perhaps, before we read the chapter, is there anything you might offer just by way of kind of like set up and maybe remind us of some of these characters here? Like, I think Amnon, like we've heard next to nothing about him. Absalom's a name that will sound more familiar, maybe just because we already talked about it in connection with Psalm 143. But I don't know. Anything you can do to kind of help like set the stage for some of these characters here?
Okay, so I have to give credit to Dr. Rick Stuckwish, who came up with he published a Lenten series, Hosanna to the Son of David, like in 2005, 2006, that basically starts with 1 Samuel 12 and runs through Solomon becoming king, and then ultimately Palm Sunday and Holy Week being the Son of David really being Jesus that we're focusing on.
Yeah.
But trying to get some of these ideas together, because some of these we don't hear much about. Right. So really there's 5 major characters in the story in chapter 13. You have Amnon, who is David's firstborn son and legitimately the heir to the throne. You have his younger brother Kileab, or Nathan, who is really mentioned nowhere outside of the list of David's sons.
Yeah.
So most people believe he died very early, as I believe you probably covered back in chapter 3 with the last list. Then you have Absalom, who is third, who, as we'll see, begins to see Amnon as in his way to be the heir to the throne. Then you have Tamar, and then you have Jonadab, who kind of rides both sides of the fence, as we'll see throughout this chapter, who is actually the cousin of Amnon, Absalom, and Tamar, being the son of one of David's brothers. So that's kind of where we're going here with the cast of characters we have.
Yeah.
But really, this is the beginning of what Nathan said, as you read yesterday,
right,
in verse 11 of chapter 12, that I am bringing evil upon you out of your own house.
Yeah.
We don't go very far after chapter 12 to then, there it is.
Yeah, oh, yeah. So, I mean, even in the at the end of chapter 12, just with the death of that first son, in some ways, that just being a prelude of this is the kind of thing that's gonna happen, and I appreciate you mentioning too, actually, about David's son Nathan here, because we didn't actually have a chance to get too much into that. There were just so many things going on. Now, what was that? That was like back in chapter. Was it like 4 or 5?
It's like 3 or 4, 5. Early on in 2 Samuel.
Yeah. No, we've it's very interesting how there's all of a sudden in 2 Samuel, like as you were saying, this cast of characters. A lot of these guys who we just, for instance, I think maybe the biggest one in some ways would be Abner, right? Like who you don't really hear that much about him, like in 1 Samuel, and then all of a sudden 2 Samuel, like, whoa, okay, we're getting like all kinds of stuff developed here. So unfortunately, we're only getting the the bad stories. But well,
That is the problem.
yeah. But thank you. That helps us set the stage nicely, and for pointing out that resource for us too. Let's go ahead and we'll just read the chapter straight through and just kind of get the cast of characters all out on the stage and get everything on the table here, and we'll kind of circle back around and look at some of the details in the first verses then. But for now, reading the chapter through, this is chapter 13 of 2 Samuel in the English Standard Version. Now Absalom, David's son, had a beautiful sister whose name was Tamar, and after a time Amnon, David's son, loved her. And Amnon was so tormented that he made himself ill because of his sister Tamar, for she was a virgin, and it seemed impossible to Amnon to do anything to her. But Amnon had a friend, whose name was Jonadab, the son of Shimeah, David's brother. And Jonadab was a very crafty man. And he said to him, "O son of the king, why are you so haggard morning after morning? Will you not tell me?" Amnon said to him, "I love Tamar, my brother Absalom's sister." Jonadab said to him, "Lie down on your bed and pretend to be ill. And when your father comes to see you, say to him, 'Let my sister Tamar come and give me bread to eat, and prepare the food in my sight, that I may see it and eat it from her hand.'" So Amnon laid down and pretended to be ill. And when the king came to see him, Amnon said to the king, "Please let my sister Tamar come and make a couple of cakes in my sight, that I may eat from her hand." Then David sent home to Tamar, saying, "Go to your brother Amnon's house and prepare food for him." So Tamar went to her brother Amnon's house, where he was lying down. And she took dough and kneaded it and made cakes in his sight and baked the cakes. And she took the pan and emptied it out before him, but he refused to eat. And Amnon said, "Send out everyone from me." So everyone went out from him. Then Amnon said to Tamar, "Bring the food into the chamber, that I may eat it from your hand." And Tamar took the cakes she had made and brought them into the chamber to Amnon her brother. But when she brought them near him to eat, he took hold of her and said to her, "Come, lie with me, my sister." She answered him, "No, my brother, do not violate me, for such a thing is not done in Israel. Do not do this outrageous thing. As for me, where could I carry my shame? And as for you, you would be as one of the outrageous fools in Israel. Now therefore, please speak to the king, for he will not withhold me from you." But he would not listen to her, and being stronger than she, he violated her and lay with her. Then Amnon hated her with a very great hatred, so that the hatred with which he hated her was greater than the love with which he had loved her. And Amnon said to her, "Get up, go." But she said to him, "No, my brother, for this is wrong, and sending me away. This wrong in sending me away is greater than the other that you did to me." But he would not listen to her. He called the young man who served him and said, "Put this woman out of my presence and bolt the door after her." Now, she was wearing a long robe with sleeves, for thus were the virgin daughters of the king dressed. So his servant put her out and bolted the door after her. And Tamar put ashes on her head and tore the long robe that she wore. And she laid her hand on her head and went away, crying aloud as she went. And her brother Absalom said to her, "Has Amnon your brother been with you? Now hold your peace, my sister. He is your brother. Do not take this to heart." So Tamar lived, a desolate woman, in her brother Absalom's house. When King David heard of all these things, he was very angry. But Absalom spoke to Amnon neither good nor bad, for Absalom hated Amnon, because he had violated his sister Tamar. After 2 full years, Absalom had sheep shearers at Baal-Hazor, which is near Ephraim, and Absalom invited all the king's sons. And Absalom came to the king and said, "Behold, your servant has sheep shearers. Please let the king and his servants go with your servant." But the king said to Absalom, "No, my son, let us not all go, lest we be burdensome to you." He pressed him, but he would not go, but gave him his blessing. Then Absalom said, "If not, please let my brother Amnon go with us." And the king said to him, "Why should he go with you?" But Absalom pressed him until he let Amnon and all the king's sons go with him. Then Absalom commanded his servants, "Mark when Amnon's heart is merry with wine, and when I say to you, 'Strike Amnon,' then kill him. Do not fear. Have I not commanded you?" be courageous and be valiant. So the servants of Absalom did to Amnon as Absalom had commanded. Then all the king's sons arose, and each mounted his mule and fled. While they were on the way, news came to David, Absalom has struck down all the king's sons, and not one of them is left. Then the king arose and tore his garments and lay on the earth, and all his servants who were standing by tore their garments. But Jonadab, the son of Shimeah, David's brother, said, Let not my lord suppose that they have killed all the young men, the king's sons, for Amnon alone is dead. For by the command of Absalom this has been determined from the day he violated his sister Tamar. Now therefore let not my lord the king so take it to heart as to suppose that all the king's sons are dead, for Amnon alone is dead. But Absalom fled. And the young man who kept watch lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, many people were coming from the road behind him by the side of the mountain. And Jonadab said to the king, Behold, the king's sons have come. As your servant said, so it has come about. And as soon as he had finished speaking, behold, the king's sons came, and lifted up their voice and wept. And the king also and all his servants wept very bitterly. But Absalom fled and went to Talmai, the son of Ammihud, the king of Geshur. And David mourned for his son day after day. So Absalom fled and went to Geshur, and was there 3 years. And the spirit of the king longed to go out to Absalom, because he was comforted about Amnon, since he was dead. So a big chapter, right? Like it was very helpful that you laid out all the characters at the beginning, because a lot of moving parts here. But I mean, the story at the heart of it, I mean, you just have this atrocious sin that's committed here, right? And it's just it feels like it's the thing that tears everything apart, right? So it would be easy for us to say, really, well, this was all Amnon's fault, right? Or maybe it was all Absalom's fault, or something like that. But it reads differently in the context of the preceding chapter, right? In chapter 12, where we really see, all this stuff, all this turmoil. I mean, the fact that, this is how it's going on, that between, David's own children, you just have this, like, incestuous desire burning within them. I mean, like, this is really in a different light, showing us how David has, for some time now probably, mismanaged his household and allowed this then to become the result. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, it's definitely. That's basically that was going to be my conclusion there. But
well, okay. I'm sorry. I should quiet down and not steal your thunder anymore. But yeah, your thoughts though.
But it is a very complex story, and when you see some of these things, when I've gone through 2 Samuel and Bible studies, usually the first question asked is, wait, this is in the Bible?
Yeah, I know.
We have something like this in the Bible?
Yeah.
Like, yeah. And it also shows just how sin can twist you around. Mm-hmm. Because we have that beginning where Amnon is so tormented he's making himself sick with desire. And then as we get to verse 15, after he's fulfilled that desire, he hates her even more than his desire had been for her.
Yeah.
So this is something you want, and then when you get it, you realize, it wasn't that great in the first place.
It just makes what happens to Tamar just all the more tragic, I mean, like, even when she's like pleading with her brother, right? I mean, she just I don't know. It just goes from like insult to injury to it just keeps going from bad to worse. Like nothing good seems to come of it.
Right, and you also see just kind of, as you were saying, the denigration of David's management of his household. Dr. Steinman, in his commentary, points out that basically this circles back around to the beginning of 1 Samuel, and speaking of the high priest Eli and how he wouldn't discipline his sons no matter what kind of charge came up against them, and all, even though he knew it was all happening.
Yep.
David kind of has this whole, fatherhood mentality as well. It's like, well, okay, they're grown people now, so they can make their own decisions. But well, I mean, still, parents of grown children worry about the decisions that they make.
Yeah.
And we see that there are very dire consequences for everyone involved, whether it's Amnon, Absalom, Tamar, even Jonadab.
No, that's right. I mean, it's no. Like there's not really seemingly anybody in the end who's actually better off for these things transpiring. And I think that just how you were breaking it down, like the way that David let his own children get away from him. I mean, it's difficult too, because I mean, like to me, one of the things I'm thinking about, like, I mean, I'm thinking that the problem probably started really early on, not even when they were grown, and it was sort of like, okay, well, they're gonna do what they're gonna do. But I mean, just from the beginning, as you were pointing out, I mean, David took all these wives, all these concubines, had so many children, right? I mean, we see again and again, there's this like a theme, right? That you have like and the big one is with Jacob, with Rachel and Leah, right? You get like competition going on between the women, because I mean, like each one of them like just wants their husband to love them, wants a family, right? Wants to have that place of mother and wife, and just I mean, really, David here is even worse than Jacob and Laban, splitting it not just 2 or 4 ways, but I mean, like I don't even know. I mean, a dozen ways. And so, I mean, what kind of example did Amnon have growing up, right?
Exactly. And you have, going back to the beginning of 2 Samuel with the list of sons, I believe out of the 6 or 7 that are named there's 4 mothers involved. Mm-hmm. At least one of which he killed her former husband.
Right.
Then you get to chapter 11, and he does the same thing with Bathsheba, and really gives Amnon the idea that, okay, I'm the heir to the throne. I've seen the king do these things and get basically whatever he wants. So, I want to be king one day, so I can do the same thing.
Right. Yeah, no, I think so. And I think that the way that David has presented himself is, hey, I'm the king. King takes what he wants, right? And sometimes it's this whole, like the heart wants what it wants, right? I mean, isn't that what he just basically told everybody with the way that he conducted that with Bathsheba, right? Or even back when we saw, I keep referencing this that scene with the ark, the big celebration with the Ark of the Covenant, and the lewd dancing, and Michal makes her comment, and he says, "Hey, I'm the king. I'm gonna do what I want, and I've got lots of other women if you're not happy about it." I mean, like that denigration of his role as father, as husband. I mean, that was just all before Amnon. And just as you were saying, I mean, is it any surprise that Amnon decides that, well, he wants what he wants, and he's going to take what he wants?
Exactly. I mean, when you have an example like that of what it means to be a father or a husband, or even just how to be a man, which we see go throughout history as just, you have people who have gone on to do horrible, heinous things like Amnon.
Yeah.
And one of the things they see is, well, okay, what kind of example did he have growing up? And usually they're fairly bad examples.
Right. I mean, and it's just hard then, because I think this chapter then, as much as as you were saying, because I think it's very normal for people these days to look at this chapter and say, whoa, this isn't the Bible, right? But I mean, it's condemning, I think, for us. It goes back to chapter 12 and what Nathan said to David, that if this is how the children are acting, it's because they saw it in the parents. They got it from somewhere. They didn't make this stuff up. But we do need to talk about this guy. this crafty guy. It says Jonadab. A few things I think we can say about him, but first we got to take our break. Everybody, hold on. We're looking at 2 Samuel 13 on Thy Strong Word. We'll be right back.
In many ways, St. Matthew Lutheran Church in
Okay,
Bel Air,
so
Maryland,
90 seconds
is just
here.
like any other
Let's look at some of
Lutheran
these questions
church,
here.
Missouri
So the
Synod
evil
Church.
scheme was
They
his
have worship
idea, and then at the
services
end,
each
he's sure to be
Sunday
the one
and
to
reach
bring the
out to
good
their
news.
community. But one thing
Yeah,
they don't
right?
do
I
is
mean,
pay their
that
electric
does
bill.
kind of feel
Hello,
like...
this is Rahema Kavuga, Synod Relations
I
Manager
mean,
of
just think
Lutheran
about
Church
it, right? I
Extension
mean, if
Branch.
he's
And
kind
if
of
you want
the,
to hear what St.
like,
Matthew
nephew,
actually
right?
did to eliminate their electric bill,
Isn't
just
this like
visit
a real trope, though, like in literature,
That's
like the strife between
interest-time.org.
nephews and uncles? It's like all the time. It's like, I mean, this is like Uncle Scar and his nephew Simba, right? I mean, which itself kind of goes back to Shakespeare. But yeah, no, there's always this strife, and clearly it's so he can find himself a way to wiggle in here and see some power in the vacuum, right? So he's going to just get rid of a couple of the heirs who are ahead of him. Let's see here, some other questions. Let's see. Well, we got over email.
In 1924, by the grace of God, KFUO began broadcasting Good News of Christ for You. A long part of this history is bringing you worship services
Is the
to
man
hear
after
and
God's own
receive the
heart
good gifts of God
complicit,
in
or
His
is he
words.
naive about the intent of
This
his son
Sunday morning,
Amnon?
join us for services from Trinity Lutheran Church at 8 a.m.
Interesting. Is there
Lutheran
anything
Church
textually that would
at
indicate that
10:30,
David
as well as
favors
Bible study
Amnon
from
over
St. Paul's
Tamar?
Lutheran Church in De Pere at 9:30. Hear Christ for You in Sunday morning
Well, I mean, I think
services
we've
on
kind of covered
KFUO.
this idea that he was a terrible example. Welcome back, everybody, to Thy Strong Word. We're looking at 2 Samuel chapter 13 today, the tragedy of Tamar. And, speaking of that name, right, like you might be thinking to yourself, hang on, was that the other Tamar who was also treated terribly by the men in her life who were supposed to do much better by her. There might be something actually worth pointing out about that in just a second. Making some connections here. Joined today by our guest, Pastor Doug Minton in Blaine, Minnesota. If you've got a question or comment for us and you're listening live, join the conversation. You can call 1-800-730-2727, or if you're in St. Louis, 314-821-0850. You can also send an email to kfuo@kfuo.org. Let's just starting to take a peek at some of those questions here. This is, I think, the question we want to turn to next. Is lust the source of evil? What's the best textual approach to discern the motive, the influence, or the gullibility here in stories, Bible stories like these? Yeah, I think that this is kind of the question again and again, right? Like, where does the evil come from? And there's a couple different answers. We'll have to kind of parse those things out. You can also join the conversation on Facebook.com/AJ Espinosa. Just look at the live stream there and just put your questions or comments right there in the box. Kind of asking about Jonadab. Do we ever hear more about him? Is the question. That's a good one. Don't neglect, though, before we get into some of these questions, to thank our underwriters at the Lutheran Heritage Foundation. Thank you guys for your support of Thy Strong Word. Their website, lhfmissions.org. All right, so turning to some of these questions, some of these connections here that we got going. I mean, I think it's clear that David is to blame for this in many ways, but you get this, and Jonadab was a very crafty man. And, well, I don't know about you, but this isn't the first story where we're introduced to a character who's told to be very crafty, who sets bad things in motion, right?
Right. That would be the next thing I wanted to bring up with Jonadab is that, here he is considered very crafty, you go back to Genesis chapter 3, and you have the serpent was the most crafty of all the creatures.
Yep.
Very, very similar in wording there, both in the English and in the Hebrew. So I think the writer of 2 Samuel is trying to bring that point out. It's not something that he wants to drop, because I'm not sure, I can't remember seeing Jonadab mentioned anywhere else in the scriptures except for in chapter 13 here. But the idea of bringing about that he's very crafty to kind of set these things in motion, and then at the end try to help pick up the pieces.
Yeah, right.
Put in stuff,
he's just there to
shift
help,
everything
right?
onto Absalom.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yep. Yeah, no, I think that's really insightful. Because it's very much like Genesis 3, where you have the serpent, right, introduced, and you have all this curse that falls on the serpent and everything else, but like you don't really talk about the serpent per se, right? Really, in some ways, like not really for the rest of Scripture until we get to Revelation. Then all of a sudden, there's all this like serpent stuff that comes back, right? But like similarly here, right, Jonadab, he's introduced, and what I think that points to, I like the way that you put it. I think you said use the phrase like he's there to stir things up, right? And I think that's exactly like what we're supposed to be getting. That the source of the evil is not Jonadab, right? It's not like this is all Jonadab's fault. Like, oh well, the devil made me do it. Like, that's not what you can say about Genesis 3 either, right? As if it's all the devil's fault, right? Sure, there's always an instigator. There's always someone who's wanting to shake things up and take advantage of the chaos, right? Because chaos is a ladder. So Jonadab's there who wants to take advantage of the situation. But, it reminds me of one of the sayings of the Lord, right? That, temptations are bound to happen, but woe to him through whom they happen, right? So Jonadab's there. It could have been anybody, though, because already the evil was in place, just waiting for an opportunity.
That's the image in the stirring of the pot.
Yeah.
It's like he's just there with the spoon. Everything else is already in the pot.
Yeah.
He's not bringing anything into it, but setting things into motion, and giving Amnon the idea, which as the chapter unfolds, we see tying in. Jonadab even understands kind of the way David just lets things slide. And we see it also in the actual rape and violation of Tamar. As Amnon basically commands her not to come lie with him, she goes into protest, and then when the protest doesn't work, then she's like, "Well, just ask Dad. Dad'll let us get married, and it won't be a problem." It's like, okay, if they already have that idea in their minds. Yeah.
No. Okay. So those are a couple of really good points. So, so this is actually for me then raising a question, which is, okay, just even her suggestion, I feel like makes this connection stronger. All right. So these are all children of Judah, right? And this sure sounds a lot like, in some ways, of the story of Judah in Tamar, right? Which was also incestuous. Was also a case where Judah really ended up being the one who wronged Tamar in a lot of ways. It wasn't rape, but it did come to Tamar in order to even just really have like any kind of security. Ended up making herself out to be a prostitute. So in a lot of ways, you still have this man who brings the woman, who brings Tamar, also named Tamar, right, into this terrible situation. Do you think that there's like some deliberate links here in the way the story is being told?
I definitely believe there are deliberate links, just from the name and kind of the similar situations being brought about. Yeah. The one case I'm trying to tread very lightly on is how much to put onto Tamar. Because usually in these situations, the woman is the one who feels the brunt of the weight of the guilt of it all. And I definitely don't want to, give anyone the idea I'm thinking that, Tamar's part in it is kind of bringing it on. But, she gives another option that is not necessarily any better. Because, again, okay, yes, we go talk to Dad. The two of us get married as brother-sister, even though they're halves.
Yeah.
Still not in accordance with the law in Israel.
Right.
So,
Yeah, no, I feel what you're saying, right? You
trying to tread lightly there.
No, I feel that. It's hard to say anything about these sorts of, just most grievous and horrendous of things. I think that maybe if we can use the story of Judah and Tamar as a helpful foil, and because it's interesting, right? Because in some ways, both Tamars, right, in these stories, and now I'm like wishing we had really read, what is that, Genesis 38, I think, that we had read that one too. But in both cases, right, so in the case of Tamar, she is betrothed, or is it she actually get married? No, it's starting to slip there. But
the other Tamar, she's been married to two brothers.
Right. That's right. She was
the third
actually
brother
married.
Was
that's right.
Quite younger.
Mm-hmm. And so Judah was like by the law of the Lord, right? Like supposed to be giving then his youngest son, the third son, to Tamar. And this is important, right? Because again, like we have to appreciate the circumstances they find themselves in. Tamar, the first Tamar, has no security in life. She's got it's a very bad situation for her to be in, to be this childless widow, right, after the first two sons have died. Just not good. And so, when Judah then really wrongs her by withholding her husband, really the man who should be her husband, and in some ways, because Judah, agrees to it, he really is her husband in that sense. Because Judah wrongs her in this way, right, that's what then forces her hand, and she does this thing with, pretending to be the prostitute and ending up seeking out the relationship with Judah, right? And so I think you have that story, and I think that some interpreters could say, like, wow, really, Tamar doing that? No, that's not right either. Well, okay, I'm not going to say that that's like a good thing, or that God, smiles upon, clever uses of prostitution or anything like that. Like, I'm not saying that either. But I gotta say, like the way I look at that chapter, even the way Judah looks at it, he says in the end, hey, she's more righteous than I am, right? I think Tamar, in that the first Tamar, is, picking the lesser of two evils. I think she's making the best out of a bad situation. I don't know if there was some better way still. Maybe so, right? I don't think I'm wise enough to know. But I think at the end of the day, I do not think we're supposed to be blaming the women here. I think they are trying to make the best of a bad situation, knowing that no way forward is good. No way forward is free from evil or sin, right? We're stuck in bad situations. And, this is what happens to us, right? And maybe here's a little bit of getting back to our context. We find ourselves confronted with bad choices. And the faithful thing is to try to pick the least bad one for the sake of honoring God and serving our neighbor, right?
Right. And so with the second Tamar, we have the same thing, where it's like, being violated, one time, or living basically the possibility of the life of like Hagar.
Yeah.
And just kind of being, you're there simply because, well, okay, we're married now, so you're stuck here.
Yeah.
Again, not necessarily the best situation for her either.
No. And to think of, any children, right, that should come of this, right? I mean, you got to think about that too. I mean, Tamar, when she says this, and she suggests, hey, if you ask, like you were saying, if you ask Dad, right, like he'll, I mean, he's pretty laissez-faire. He'll let us do what we want. I mean, like, is she already thinking about perhaps like her child, like her future children, right? I mean, like, to make sure that they have a father, right? That they have a home, that they have like some way of being provided for, right? I mean, like I really don't. Again, like, I'm not saying that like this is necessarily like a good thing or even the best thing, but I don't think we're meant to be judging Tamar here. At least I feel like I don't have room to throw the first stone. We have on the phone here, we got a question here from James. Good morning, James. Yeah, good. Always good to hear from your brother. What do you got for us?
Okay, yeah, I have the questions about being lovesick.
Okay.
Biblically.
Okay.
And so I'd like to ask, I guess, Pastor, what does it mean for Amnon to be lovesick biblically? Is it the same textually here in this passage as it is in the Song of Solomon, chapter 5, verse 8? And then for you, the moderator, I'd like to know, is there anything that indicates textually here that David favors Amnon over Tamar? Like her plea kind of suggests that they consult the king and that he would not deny him his lust. Is there something in this text or in the text of 2 Samuel that indicates that David favors Amnon over Tamar? And I'll hang up and listen.
Yeah, thanks, James. Those are some good questions, and I appreciate that, because I think that we have a very strong tendency, I've said this before, to take a psychological approach to narratives, and we want to like kind of like get in their heads and do their look at their motivations, which is just kind of the way that we do storytelling, I think, these days. So I think it's a good question then, because I think our minds are already going there. So it's good to try to understand as much as we can, or at least look at what the text does say, as you were saying. So yeah, brother, what do you make of that with his first question there from James about this love sickness that's going on?
Well, my first thought is I'd rather have the second question, but but quite honestly, with the idea of love sickness as we think of it, I think we have almost like two sides of the coin here between 2 Samuel 13 and Song of Solomon 5, is that, well, we have to go with, first of all, is it really love sickness that Amnon has? Mm-hmm. Or is it just, this is the, what does the text say? That, it seemed impossible to him to do anything to her or with her. It's like kind of that prize just beyond reach. Mm-hmm. That then does that, could there have been love in, genuine love in Amnon's heart, that he wanted to find some way to have like a family with Tamar? I can't say whether there was or wasn't. Yeah. But the way the story tends to unfold has it more being lust sick than being sick with love, like in Song of Solomon, where it's one where that's more, just quickly perusing it as he was asking the question, is more of a, absence makes the heart grow fonder, kind of in Song of Solomon 5. Yeah,
no. I think so, that's spot on. It's a challenge. It's a challenging question, but no, I think that's right. That when you, we got too bad that we didn't have a chance to look at Song of Solomon. Right, there's another great chapter that it's hard to understand sometimes. But you have all those references in Song of Solomon, about my sister, my brother, my sister, my brother. okay, no, hang on, right? That's where you got to take a step back and realize that the term sister or brother very often meant nothing more than like my tribesmen, like my fellow tribesmen, right? So like David could have used the term to mean like his fellow Judahite, right? Or even kind of like my fellow like Israelite, right? I mean, so when they're saying this, like my brother, my sister, right? I mean, they're really they just mean like, you know, my fellow Israelite, basically, right? Or something along these lines. Or like, you know, they've they kind of consider themselves in some ways kind of like eligible to be matched together. It doesn't mean anything like the situation that you have here. And you're right about the words too. Like in Song of Solomon 5, it actually uses that phrase like I'm sick with love, weak with love, like in that sense of like you're longing to be with the person again. But this, as you were describing it, yeah, no, I mean this is like an obsession, an infatuation, where I mean he's obsessed with the idea, and I think you're right to point us to the second part of verse 2 where it says it seemed impossible to Amnon to do anything to her, right? I think that that is meant to be, it's just she seemed, like the unattainable prize, right? Like that kind of perfect idea always beyond reach, which I do think, you're right. Like you can't rule it out with 100% certainty, but I think it's pretty clear based on what he does in the description here that he's really infatuated with the idea. But that's not real love at all, right?
Right.
And I think that leads to the second half of the question there that James had. So, he's got this idea, and I think that really it's borne out, right? Because once like you said, it's just terrible. Because then once he actually goes and does this terrible thing, then he just wants to throw away Tamar, I mean, just I don't know, just to kind of take it out of the wrapper, throw it away. I mean, just using her. I mean, just it's terrible. And then so then the second half of the question then, is there some kind of favor that Amnon has? Well, okay, so looking at the word there, let's see what she actually says there. So in verse 12, she starts off with saying, "Hey, don't do this," right? Just it's a terrible thing, but hey, speak to the king. He will not withhold me from you. That language there, it's interesting. The word for withholding. I mean, this kind of reminds me honestly of Herod. And Herodias, and asking for the head of John the Baptist, right? Where there's something of a, I don't know what, it's almost because of the pride of the king, where he says, well, I'm the king, I can do what I want, right? Going back to what we've seen in David already, I can take what I want, and I can give what I want, and I mean David's shown that, right? He gave all that loot and spoil to all those people in Judah, right? So I think that maybe rather than read into this that David has a special kind of favor towards Amnon, it may just be that this is kind of a further reflection of David's pride, and that pride from power. I don't know. What do you make of that phrase there? You can go ahead and take a stab at the second question too.
Okay, I had thought I had seen something along that line.
Yeah.
But I think it's only in the end of the chapter where verse 37, and David mourned for his son day after day. Mm-hmm. Very similar to the image from chapter 12 where he spends the first week of the child's life face down on the floor, begging God to release the child from the consequences of his sin.
Right.
And it has kind of the same idea there when the news first comes that all the king's sons are dead. But when it turns out to be just Amnon, there's still that day after day mourning. And I think the best we could read into that is that just Amnon was David's firstborn.
Yeah. And
I think that's probably the only pride of place we can really put in there, is that, you know, this is his first child, and he wants the best for that child.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. And also, you know, just you saying that reminds me of the situation with Jacob and his sons, right? And what happens when he finds out that Joseph, or when he thinks he finds out that Joseph is dead, right? And how he just mourns and mourns, and he's inconsolable, and he says, "No, don't let me eat anything. I'm going down to Sheol to meet my son. Just let me go to be with him," right? And he's like speaking to his other living sons, right?
Right.
But Joseph had this particular position, right? It says, you know, he's like the son of his old age or something like that. Like I don't know exactly how old he would have been. I tend to think that maybe he wasn't so I don't know, like weak or or senile or anything like that. But that it just kind of like I don't know. He had this soft spot in his heart, and he certainly wasn't his firstborn son, but he was the firstborn of Rachel, right? So
right.
I think there is something about that, right? That like for different reasons, right? Like we have these different sentiments and different kind of connections, and yeah, I mean, like I think you can tell, like you were saying, you know, yeah, I think that there is something probably like a king like David, who, you know, he loved Jonathan, Jonathan being the elder son of Saul. You know, like he's thinking, I've got this kingdom, I'm going to hand it off to my firstborn. I mean, like how much has David been dreaming about handing off the kingdom, right, to his firstborn, right, like Saul was unable to do, right? So, I mean, I don't know. It could be that David is more mourning the idea than the actual person even.
Right. And I kind of want to skip ahead to the end of the chapter because we only have a couple minutes left. So Absalom has Amnon killed, get the word back, and then verse 34, Absalom fled. 37 says he goes to Geshur, which we're like, okay, first question is why Geshur? Mm-hmm. But if you go back to the list of sons, Absalom and Tamar's mother was the princess of Geshur.
That's right.
It was a political marriage.
Yep.
So Dad's mad at him, so he goes and runs to Granddad. You know, to try to find some shelter, because you know, grandparents tend to be a little
softer,
less strict than parents. Yes.
Yeah. No strangers to that, right? Yeah.
But then I want to make the quick point from verse 39. The spirit of the king longed to go out to Absalom because he was comforted about Amnon since he was dead. Mm-hmm. David didn't have to worry about Amnon because, well, Amnon was dead. It's the son that's missing, the son that is off for 3 years. Mm-hmm. And we'll see that through the next few chapters, is David's heart continues to go out after Absalom, and which gets him in trouble with most of his elite soldiers and generals, is that he's too fond of Absalom because now Absalom is the heir to the throne.
That's right. No, that's a really good point. And you just see it again and again, how David's desires are just out of whack, and they get him into all kinds of trouble. And it's when the new David shows up, you know, it's just remarkable how Jesus at every turn, he resists all the temptations of desire. You know, he does not get led astray. He's undeterred in that love, not just for, you know, these ideas or these things that he wants or craves, but he loves his Father. He loves us. Thank you so much, brother, for unpacking a difficult chapter, and looking forward to having you on again.
Thy Strong Word, Produced by the Lutheran
Everybody,
Church,
Pastor
Missouri
Doug
Synod
Minton,
Office of
pastor in
National
Blaine,
Mission,
Minnesota.
in collaboration with
Until next time, I'm
worldwide
Pastor A.J.
KFUO,
Espinosa.
the official
Peace.
broadcast ministry of the LCMS. Your support is vital for this program to continue. You can make a gift safe, secure, and easily online at KFUO.org. Thank you for listening and supporting Thy Strong Word.